All right. Thanks.
All right.
Let's get started.
This talk, I don't really want to be all about, my journey or whatever. I'll just put one slide on this and we can jump into the content, but just to set some kind of background for this. So my path it's a little bit longer one. So I'm in my 40s and, I've been in industry a while before starting this stuff, but we'll talk about different paths. For me personally, engineer. So University of Melbourne, studied in engineering, was actually electrical, but I did computer science as well. Then pretty traditional, worked as a junior engineer in Siemens, kind of got recruited there, spent some time in their headquarters in Germany, in Munich, doing kind of engineering stuff. So, learning skills, building systems. And then I kind of transitioned from kind of technical hands-on work to kind of handle sales engineering. So that was my path into more of the startups business world, was to kind of go from a engineer to a sales engineer. So still doing technical stuff, but supporting a salesperson. So I did that for a while. And then I kind of took a leap into startup land. So I worked for at that time, a small startup out of the States, Bay Area startup, which just had started its kind of global journey. So just setting up kind of offices around the world. I was a very early employee here in Australia. And long story short, we got acquired by another company, which got acquired by another company. And that company is part of Juniper Network. So you may have heard of Cisco. Juniper is kind of one of the biggest competitors to Cisco in kind of core infrastructure for basically the internet. So as part of that, I guess you could call it a growth stage startup. So, building out teams, setting up operations. I was running their kind of advanced technology division in Asia Pacific when I left. So I was kind of, leading a team of folks across Asia, trying to introduce new technologies. And often it was the startups that we acquired. So, big company, they would sometimes develop stuff in-house, and then they would also buy small startups and integrate them into this kind of bigger thing. So I was kind of the person who took those small, startups and basically did the sales for them in Asia. So that was kind of my role, which is weird because I'm a super introvert. I'm not a salesperson, but somehow I stumbled into that role, which was a great learning experience. So, and then it kind of gets more interesting, I guess, for the context of this talk, which is at some point there was big company, politics, reorganization, something like that. So, I kind of lost my position as part of this kind of, a big reorg happened, and then someone else kind of, got restructured, and there was only two people working for one spot, and I didn't get it. And anyway, that sort of kind of reminded me how much I hated politics, and, it just seemed like a bit of a waste of time. It's I just want to do good stuff, and, I don't want to have to deal with this. And then that gave me the spark, and then I decided to kind of jump out. So at that point, I had a little bit of savings. And so I felt I could survive for a while. And so I kind of did that. But before I did that, I actually kind of planned it out a bit. In my case, what I did was started the company together with a friend. And I said to him, look, I'll go and work and I'll pay you. So, I'll go and take my salary, split it in two, and, I'll take half, you take half, right? So we can get off the ground, you can pay your bills and whatever else. And so I did this for a good 1 or 2 years, actually, to go and get enough progress to kind of get started. And at that time, we've got some seed funding. So during that transition, got seed funding, and then I felt comfortable to kind of jump off. In hindsight, I probably could have jumped off right at the start, but I actually like that transition thing because it kind of it was okay, it's my money being spent. How should I spend my money well and not just waste it? It's my salary. It's going to pay for my friend who's was the CTO, and he was a game engine developer previously. And then we hired a couple more people, designer, developer. And so basically, my salary was getting split up amongst 4 people, myself and 3 others, before we finally got seed funding. So yeah, jumped off to start a company. Long story short, have started a few companies, most of them failures, 1 or 2 moderate successes. And we can talk about that journey a bit. All but one was in software. I did a chocolate company as well. So a vegan chocolate company, which is a wonderful, if you want to push yourself outside the boundaries, do something which is the opposite of what you're doing. I know nothing about food, never worked in it, can't cook, and, managed to kind of launch a product, manufacture it in China, distribute it across multiple countries in Asia, and just in 2 years. And then we sold the company. So that was an amazing learning experience. And then fast forward to now. So as I was working for startups, I started angel investing because, I enjoy kind of supporting and learning from others who are doing cool stuff. And long story short, I'm now my day job is as a venture capitalist. So I kind of transitioned. So I'm still doing 2 software startups in parallel. Well, actually, they're being run by other people, but I'm kind of, actively support. And then my day job is basically as a venture capitalist now. So I'm kind of investing in early stage startups. So literally from idea stage, people just starting through to pre-seed and seed stage. And we'll talk a bit about that. So hopefully that gives a bit of context. By the way, feel free anytime, just jump in with questions and I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. And thanks, Jared, for the background. Appreciate that. So let's talk about impact. I kind of like, this is not rocket science, but I think it's good to kind of, frame it as like, what are the ways in entrepreneurship that we can have an impact, given that we're all EAs and we want to do good in our lives, right? I view it as like there's a kind of a continuum, and I think there's great options all the way across the spectrum, depending on what suits you and what's a good fit for you and what you think you can kind of work on in a good model for you. So let's look on the left-hand side, which is kind of a direct impact. So this is actually a startup in China based in Shanghai called CellX. And we actually invested in that company. So, we're, our fund is an investor in this company, and I got to know the founder. So he's actually an EA. So he's a Chinese guy who studied overseas. I think it was in Stanford, and he was part of the EA Stanford kind of group, maybe one of the organizers during his time there. And then he went back to China and he thought to himself, like, okay, what impact can I have in the world? And he thought, hey, factory farming, China is the biggest consumer of protein on the planet. It's the fastest growing consumer of protein on the planet. If you take a random pig on the planet, chances are that pig lives in China somewhere. Now, at the moment, it's in very kind of like comfortable conditions, relative speaking, to maybe some of the other things, because it's a lot of like small rural farms, but that's changing rapidly. Now we're kind of building industrial grade. Long story short, you know all this stuff. He said, I'm going to work on this. So he started a startup which is doing cultivated meat in China. It's one of the handful of cultivated meat companies. And so that's a very direct impact sort of work. Like, yes, it's a company, it's not a non-profit, but he's the founder of that project. And if it's successful, if the technology works and the regulatory opens up, then, very possibly he could have a massive impact, let's say 10, 15 years down the line. If we can go on and replace even 5% of factory farming with cultivated meat or other alternatives, it's a big impact. So that's on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum is like my game company. So it's actually a mobile games company that I started many years back, and I kind of handed it over to someone else to run now. And, I don't know if it's going to be successful. It's still alive after all these years, and it's kind of had its ebbs and flows, and it's actually in the transitioning to AI gaming at the moment. So, but it's, has been doing a lot of like fashion games. So, running a boutique, simulate, that you're running a shop and, you've got customers and you're dressing clients and so forth. And this is totally an earn to give thing. So it's a totally commercial company, there's no real impact. I mean, it's a good positive game, it's good, entertaining people, not consuming that many resources in the world. So it's better than fast fashion. But fundamentally, it's like it's a paid company. And this one is just earn to give. Like if we get an exit from that, but also my salary that I've paid myself over the years, right? That's gone to charity. But if that gets an exit, then I'll just take those proceeds and just donate them or invest them, then donate them later. So that's kind of like a pure earn to give. And I guess in the middle is this kind of new startup, relatively new, that I'm kind of getting off the ground. And so I'm a co-founder of it, and I help kind of on product and kind of on the side. And this one is kind of a hybrid model where we started off as just a commercial company. And then in the middle, we kind of like decided to pivot it. So basically it's as a hybrid model where every paid customer that we get for the service, we give a free seat to a free client for an EA doing something good. And these are some of the logos of organizations of clients that we kind of like given free services to. So it's kind of like, it basically hopefully can grow and be a successful company, and any profits will go to earn to give. But along the way, it's kind of like directly, or indirectly helping out the eight causes by supporting. It's an accountability SaaS. It's like a human accountability app. So it connects you with the real coach, and I'll talk about that. So hopefully that kind of gives you some possibilities. I'll just kind of, so Pete's asked, a bit older with kids, you left corporate, would you do the same? So the short answer is yeah, absolutely. It gets harder though, to be honest. Like when you're kind of stuck into into a job. Actually, you know what? Let me talk about that. I've actually got a slide, paths to your own startup. So good segue here. How can you do it? So in my way, I kind of like, worked in industry, and then I kind of worked for a startup, and then I started my own startup, and now I'm investing in startups as well. Pretty indirect path. It kind of took many, many years to kind of get there. Is it the only way? Let's talk about pros and cons. The short answer is there's no right way. It's whatever suits your situations, but there are kind of like considerations for all of them. Firstly, I will say, as you kind of like get into a career, you kind of like get this very silly human thing of like, what's it? I'm sure there's a better term, but fear of loss. It's like, I have something now. I have this high-paying job. I have this career path. I have this team. I have this, whatever. And it's kind of like human nature. But like, sometimes you're less willing to take risks when you have to kind of like give something up. So that's something to consider. On the flip side, like, hopefully at that point, if you've kind of been able to, you've got a little bit of savings, and you can kind of like, you've got savings, so you can kind of like jumpstart and get things started either yourself or you pay people to do that. And secondly, you have hopefully some experience of working, starting up teams, leading teams, starting up new projects. And maybe you understand your own industry really well. Like, maybe you've been working for 3 or 4 years in, airline industries, so you understand it really well. Or you've been working in a sector of, fintech. And so you understand that and the problem, and that probably gives you a good spark for what the company that you're going to work on is. So let's talk about like, jumping straight in. I think this is a very viable path. I think when you're kind of like straight out of uni, you've got of course you've got obligations, but like, you don't have any kind of corporate obligations at least. So, what's the worst that can happen? If you've got a good degree, or even if you don't, like if you're a relatively, hardworking person, could you get back into a job if the startup thing doesn't work? Absolutely, right? Like taking a year to go and give something a shot, assuming that you are fortunate enough and recognize that a lot of people are not. But if you're fortunate enough to have a room to stay and, enough money to buy some food and pay your, whatever debt obligation monthly payments, then, taking a year is like a wonderful way to kind of like stretch yourself. And, honestly, it's definitely viable and possible. Statistics show that like, the most successful startups are actually started by people a little bit later in their career. But then we know of plenty of examples of people who've jumped in straight out of like, uni, or even, not gone to uni and been able to make things work. So you have to do more work, and you have to probably concentrate on fundraising a little bit if you don't have resources. And we're going to take our time and talk about that as well. Now, you can also work for one. I think that's kind of a good intermediate step. Like, you graduate, you've got your CS, degree, you work for a startup. Now, I'm assuming now the job market's still good, and no crystal balls. I have no idea how kind of, AI plays out in terms of like availability for junior jobs or kind of entry level jobs. But assuming that kind of works, then, you work for one. And then within 2 or 3 years, you've kind of really got great experience. Like in a startup, you really get to touch all the different technology, all the pieces. If it's really a small startup, then you'll be doing everything, right, together with the founders. So that's a really good way to do it. Or you may just find like, hey, as an early team member in a startup is a great experience. And then, you probably get options. So if the thing takes off, you'll get some wealth that you can kind of do something with later. And you may decide to kind of like keep working for one, which is also great. And then I've talked a bit about working in industry, the pros of that one. So I think there's different paths. I kind of like this hybrid model of like, because I'm kind of doing it now. I've got a day job. My job is, as a venture capitalist we've got 2 partners, myself and another guy, and we basically run a small VC fund. But like being able to like pay people, or support people, your co-founders, for them to kind of work on it while you're kind of doing something. I also kind of like that model, especially because if you're a software engineer in a developed country, you're earning a lot of money, relative to an average person. You're earning a ton of money. And that's more than enough to pay for like one or two or three, full-time developers, perhaps in a lower cost country. So, I'm happy to kind of expand on that, if anyone's interested. So yeah, hopefully that gives you some ideas to paths to start up. Maybe I'll just pause here. Does anyone have any questions, like verbally? Just want to, ask, or otherwise I can keep going. All right. So let's keep going. So let's talk a bit about, what are the chances for, what can increase your chances of success if you want to get into entrepreneurship? The top reason that the startups fail, and look, there's been different studies and they're a bit different, but they come up with kind of broadly similar things. The top reasons that startups fail, number one is by some stretch is like just no market need. Like you work on an idea that is not really needed by the market, or it's so niche, that there's just not enough of a market. So you can say that's no market need. That comes before everything else, But if you had to go and look at number two, it's kind of running out of cash. And most of the rest of the talk will be, it will be two topics: market need and then running out of cash. Like how do we address these two problems? Then there's like team and competition. A lot of people fixate on top competition. I'm actually, these days trying not to worry about competition, because it's like, just do your own thing. The internet is big, the world is big. Even if you get a great niche, that niche could be absolutely massive in absolute terms on a global scale. So, competition, I spent a lot of time earlier in my career kind of like worrying about competition or oh, they have this feature, we better add this feature or whatever. And it just never really worked out when we were trying to just follow in 100% in the paths of an existing kind of company, or getting so distracted by other competitors. And I found like things worked a lot better when we're just like, we're going to do our thing. We're going to focus on our customers. We're going to go and iterate and learn and kind of, really satisfy their needs and not really worry about the competition. Pricing cost issues, poor product. Yeah, I worry about that. We've got a very buggy product at the moment for the current startup. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, ignore customer. And also timing is an issue. But look, if you have to focus on two, no market need and running out of cash. Now, I will say as well, like this is kind of more like the formal reasons for failure. I think the other thing is honestly like your mental health and your personal well-being. And this is kind of like a whole other dimension about like taking care of yourself. So towards the end, I'll just touch on that briefly. So let's talk about market need. So, if you haven't heard of the lean startup concept, I'm sure probably everyone has, but definitely read up on it. The idea is like, how do you validate a concept with as little time or money as needed? For example, like we're engineers. I don't actually write much code these days. Well, I don't write production code. I just write code for fun, hobby stuff. But like once you write code, then you've kind of committed yourself in many ways to a certain path, and there's kind of like baggage associated with dropping it for a lot of people. So can you do stuff before you start coding? Can you just start with like, a little bit of traffic in a landing page? Can you mock up what you're trying to do? Can you go and what's a fair test? EAs tend to be rational people. So what is an unbiased way to kind of validate, the concept that you're thinking of? And then I think like, depending on what you're doing, trying to get both quantitative and qualitative feedback. So let's take a random idea, and Uber for kind of pet massages, right? Okay. We're on demand. We're getting like people to come over and massage your pets, rich people, want their pets to be happy, and we're going to go freelancers to go and massage pets. How would we do this? Like we could build this service, right? Spend a lot of time and build this thing, that would take maybe like, a couple of person years to get a really good version up, or we could just go and throw up a landing page. So, either do the design ourselves or pay a designer, get a landing page up, maybe get some traffic, maybe some free viral traffic, or we can go and get some paid traffic coming into it. We could measure, drop-off rate at the different points of the funnel, for that web page. We can see how many people like leave an email address or how many people start the checkout flow, and of course you can't take their money, but like you can start the checkout flow and kind of get a sense for that. You can run different ads and see what message resonates for that. Hey, you don't even need a landing page. You could just go and have an empty, generic landing page and then just run different ads with different business ideas. So there's a lot of ways before you even start coding, I think, to do that. Now, nothing is free. Like it still takes time and it takes, some money, but way less money, than, the equivalent of paying yourself for a year to kind of build a prototype or build a version 1. And if this pet massage kind of, idea is, getting good results, then that's a pretty good sign to move to the next step and actually start to build it and design it in detail and build it. And I think like the key thing I've learned over the years, I was terrible at this. My games company before in the early, it was like horrible. It was like, let's plan out the next year's product. What are we going to build for the next year? And we'd go off for a year and literally build it. And the UX would be a disaster and it wouldn't meet customer needs. And, and then it would take another year to kind of like solve that. And whereas like the evolution now these days, for the new project, which is still work in progress, it's very much a very fast iteration cycle. And I'm going to take you through some examples to kind of illustrate this. So that's on the market need, hopefully give you some ideas. I just want to give you an idea of like how, so this is a work in progress. It hasn't found full market fit. It's kind of satisfying a bunch of users, and we've got some revenue, we got some traffic, we got like some happy user base. But I would say like we're still trying to figure out who's the right person for this, who's the best persona, and how can we improve retention. So yeah, we can definitely, please go ahead. And the slides are available as well. So got that. So like in this example here, so what is Goals 1? I'll just kind of quickly show you. So Goals 1 is basically like a piece of software that connects you with a human coach. So this is kind of landing page, how it works. This is kind of like from the UI. This is actually the web version. So we all use it internally. So as clients as well as coaches. So this is how the software looks here. So for example, I've got a chat interface on the right, and I've got my like kind of daily, priorities here. And this is my coach, my human coach is kind of like giving me feedback on this, et cetera, and giving me feedback on metrics and so forth. So this is kind of like the startup that, we're building. By the way, it's like one developer, my co-founder, who's kind of like, business strategy ops, and he's also a developer himself. So it's kind of like 1.5 developers, myself on product. So it's kind of like 2.5 people. And then we've got like a head coach, and then we've got a bunch of freelancers who are kind of like coaches who support this. So that's kind of the scale of it now. And, we've got different, features within this, right? So this piece of software, okay, so coming back to this, how do we go and like test it for traffic? So traffic, there's many ways to get traffic. There I can give you some resources on, links and books later or offline. But basically, we've decided on, we're going to go and get traffic for iteration through two primary ways. One is search ads and one is SEO. And we've actually kind of like, so what we do is we kind of bring traffic to the site through those two different ways. And now we get organic traffic. So I've got organic traffic has risen as well. We're starting to rank on some of the key terms like accountability partner, human accountability partner, or human accountability app. We're starting to rank on some of the pages now. So we get some traffic coming in, and that's kind of like, it's just enough for us to kind of do a fast iteration cycle. So if you don't have enough, we would kind of like buy more traffic just to kind of do that. Now, is it expensive? Yes, but it's less than the cost of like paying coders and paying payroll for a few people for a month. So we think it's kind of justified. So that's kind of how we get traffic. And now, thankfully, our search ads are ROI positive now. So we can kind of like just scale up, like steadily scale up. So if we spend $100 on ads, we get more than 100 back in revenue, So for us, it's kind of profitable to buy traffic. So that lets us kind of like go a little bit faster. A/B testing, at the moment, we're using like Optimize. I think it's being sunsetted. So we're going to need to look for another platform. But basically, we're running a bunch of like A/B tests all the time to kind of like see the results. So I want to kind of, make this, you can still see my screen, right? I want to kind of show you like, how we practically do this, just to give you, a 1 minute kind of feel for the type of work we're trying to do here. we'd go into optimize. And so, for example, like here's a running A/B test of like, does the starting image have like, chat bubbles or no chat bubbles? Like basically this one here, we're unsure if these chat bubbles detract or do they help in the experience. And we kind of like, have a look at this and we'd look at like, okay, what's the bounce rate? And at the moment, bounce rate is similar. So, the original looks to be better, but then we have different metrics, like how many people visited the free trial landing page. And we go and have a look and say, okay, well, the original performs worse. So it's not a conclusive test at the moment because one metric performs better with one variant and another metric, which is important, free trial landing visits performs better with the other one. So we have to keep running it. But the whole idea is that we keep on, running tests, all the time with our traffic that we have. Next, obviously, we're tracking the analytics. So we're heavy users of GA and the various funnels and features there. And we link it all up into Slack so we can kind of get real-time feedback. It's like, okay, someone reached this part of the flow, but they didn't reach that part of the flow. Or someone started the checkout process, but they didn't complete. Why is that? And we'll try to do that. Next, we've got like a Hotjar. So basically like every day or two, we'll go and look at visitors. So people who visit our website, and by the way that people access our site, our app is usually from the website. We haven't built the same thing into the mobile app, but we're planning to kind of try to do that if we can find a good library. So we're tracking, like literally watching replays of people scrolling through, navigating through our website to see where do they get confused, where do they drop off, what might be the reason that they drop off there. And also just straight up analytics, like which pages do people go through? So for example, we used to have a bunch more pages at the top, and then we realized that actually the other ones weren't that, no one visits the blog, right? No one's interested in reading blogs these days, apparently. So FAQ is like the most visited page. So we put that first, and then reviews for the service. So, that's important. So, let's put that second, et cetera, et cetera. So Hotjar, like, or any other equivalent is very useful. Now, how do we get qualitative feedback? Well, we're a little bit lucky because our service is a human talking to the client. So we kind of like naturally we get to interact with them and we learn from them and we ask them questions naturally. So, but most startups don't have that. So how do you do it? I'd say like make good use of like polls, make good use of surveys, offer to jump on a call with them and just say, hey, we're offering a free 15-minute founder call. And especially people who drop. Two groups that you want to really care about. A is the people who really love what you're doing and hopefully are paying you money. Learn everything about them as you can because they're your best, initial target market. So what is that persona? Who are they? What do they do? Where do they hang out? How did they discover you? Et cetera, et cetera. Chances are that person, there's like, a million people like that person, around the world that you could possibly, target. And then you also want to find out where are people dropping off. They may not be your best target customers, but there may be legitimate product problems or UX problems that kind of like cause them to drop off. So I'd highly recommend to do that. And you can also get other feedback. So for example, this is a semi-failed startup that I did before, which is a in-app polling platform. It's kind of like a SaaS platform. And here's a recent poll that we asked, which is like, and this pops up inside the app. So which feature should we add next? And so people really want, this per goal auto reminders and they're less interested in the other. So whichever ways you can kind of like get feedback, the better. And I'm kind of like harping on this for a reason, because I think this is honestly the most important thing you can do as a founder is to get feedback from your customers and learn and iterate from them. Any questions on kind of like, getting product market fit or learning or kind of iterating? If not, I'm going to move on to the next section, which is about, raising money. So getting some funding to support your startup. Any questions before we move on?
We do have a question. Yes. So, yeah.
I had a question. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on like finding the right balance between like a problem with the idea or the execution, because I see a lot of people like say a lot of startups are not very innovative or something which the market needs, but it just does something better. So how do you kind of balance that idea that like say perhaps DoorDash is nothing revolutionary, it's what say Uber Eats or one other app does, but they're the ones who have like come into the market and they've really captured it. So their execution was the one that was the key thing there. So as a founder, how do you kind of balance between those two aspects of your startup?
That's a great question. I guess like more startups would fail because of the idea or the target market wasn't right than the execution. So initially, like, yes, you have to have good execution. Ultimately, you probably can't succeed without good execution, no matter how good the target market or how much you have that market to yourself. But like the first place, the starting point is kind of like, how good is this kind of idea? Depends a little bit on how competitive is the space. Like if you're entering a fairly competitive space, then the execution matters a lot, right? You need to do something maybe with a much, much better, user experience. Like it's much more interactive, or it has a different modality of like interaction, instead of a traditional point and click interface, it's now a more of a conversational interface or something like that. If you're going into a space that is more of a niche that hasn't been kind of exploited by others, then you can go and not have a really good execution and you can still go and do really well. Like an example is like, for podcasting, in the old days, I kind of ran a podcast for a while. I've kind of paused it for now, but like we use this software, if you're familiar with Libsyn, right? This horrible like hosting software for podcasts. It was like the OG kind of, software. It's like a really, really horrible, interface, whatever, but it's still like one of the biggest like hosting platforms like around. Because in those days, like you just didn't really need to have a nice interface. It just needed to solve a problem. And that was the problem of like, hey, I don't want to put hosting up by myself for a podcast, right? So I think like, if you can, ideally, if you can pick a space that is less crowded, then you can kind of like, you don't have to worry as much, at least initially, about execution. You can just, say, hey, here's something as crappy as it is. Are there people willing to come and pay for this in this very kind of like rough form? I give a perfect example, which is our own software. Like the first version of Goals One, we actually didn't code it ourselves. I got a freelancer in actually a wonderful guy in India. And I said to him, look, here's my idea. Here's some kind of quick mock-ups. I kind of like validated this myself because I've kind of joined enough accountability groups and seen them fail and talked to enough people. And I need this myself. Like I built to scratch my own itch. I work much better with accountability. And then he built the first version and it was terrible, like rough, buggy, it just kind of like fell over all the time, but it was enough. It was enough to kind of get started. And you know what? Even before that, launched the service in beta version just through email. Like it was just like, hey, this is the service. We're going to just do coaching by email backward and forward. There was no software. And we got this really rough version that helped us to build and validate, some things. The UI started to come together a little bit. And then, you know what, like after we got to a certain point, we threw it away and we kind of like wrote it a bit better, and that was then by that point was an in-house team. So I would say like, you can kind of like iterate on the execution if you're picking something that's a little bit unique and you've got an idea. Now, if you want to be, if you're competing with, Uber Eats and you want to do a better Uber Eats, well, then your execution has to be, immaculate, and you need to have all your, polished everything, and you need to have all your resources, and you need to spend a lot more money because you need to compete against them and build some sort of like critical mass to compete against them. So, yeah, hopefully that gives you some idea of the view on it. Okay, good one. So let's kind of take the remaining time on raising money. So just some comments on this. Raising money is like super intense for most people. And your day job kind of, whatever your day job is, like, working on the startup, or doing, working for an employer, it slows down a lot. It usually takes a lot of time. It's hardest when you need it most, which is usually you need it most, when you don't have money at the start. So the default advice I have like from people is to stay scrappy, keep your burn rate low. Don't get kind of like caught into the temptation of like, I'm going to hire this, super expensive, star coder, unless you really, really need it. Like if your space absolutely demands like the best, okay, then you're going to have to figure out a way to get the money to hire that person. But in many startups, like you don't really need to go and, spend a huge amount of money at the start. You can kind of keep burn rates low, do as much as you possibly can yourself. And know your runway if you have a runway. Ideally, you have an infinite runway, like you have some sort of source of funds coming in that you can kind of keep on working on this until it gets enough critical mass to kind of jump in. Know your prospective investors. Like before you go into the meeting or the call or the discussion, know what have they invested in before? What sort of check sizes? What are their objectives? This is important. Like at the end of the day, investors, whether it's angel investors, like, as in, individuals who, for example, we're all in tech. There's a lot of people who are a little bit later in their career in tech who probably have like saved quite a lot of money and have a lot of money to kind of, put in 25, 50, 100K into a startup that they like. For them, it may not be financial because, they may go and have their other investments, more stable ones. For them, it may be like, hey, this is a cool idea. I want to be part of something. Or maybe they want to have impact if you're doing something that has some sort of impact angle with it. Like that may resonate with them. Is it a sense of adventure? Maybe they've got like a boring executive job, and then this lets them go and spread their wings a bit and feel like they're part of this journey that you're on together with them. So understanding a bit about who they are. And look, sometimes you can't learn this like through searching online before a meeting, but you can ask questions at the start. Like, I'm terrible at this. I'm really bad at small talk, but like it's a skill you have to learn to kind of like figure out how to build a connection, but also try to find out the key things that you can. And then, et cetera, et cetera. Approvals, if it's an angel, like who needs approval? Like you may convince one person, is there someone else you need to convince? Or if it's a VC, what is their process for getting the investment approved? Do they have an external committee? What does the committee, work on? For example, in our VC, I just want to show you there actually, switching context. And I'm realizing we're supporting this, so I'll just go show the template only. I won't show our real data. This is like one of our steps in our venture capital fund is actually like scoring this startup. And every VC will have their own way of assessing the startup. Whatever it is, you need to understand it. Like for us, we have a very simple matrix of like, people, and then there's like subcategories within people. Do they have a learning ability? Do they have mentors? Have they built up a network themselves, which shows that they're proactive and they want to go out and engage with people? Are they open-minded? Is there evidence? Is the founding team, complete or less complete? For us, we care about impact. Are they relentless? Are they an executor? Are they someone who just, talks about plans, or they actually like they follow through? Is there previous examples of that? Would we enjoy to work with them? Although that's weighted very low. So at the end of the day, that's not an important thing for us. And are they persuasive, inspiring? Will they go and evangelize and convince people? So whatever it is, and we care then about product tech, opportunity and impact, and then what's the story potential around this? Like how much of a story can be woven around this with an authentic roots that will, because I think a lot of the time it's the story, that helps startups kind of grow. Like this is the disillusioned scientist who dropped out of academia inspired by what happened to their sister-in-law. Or this is the AI researcher who discovered something, that while doing their project, and then decided to go and branch it out into a company. So whatever it is, like understand what is the approach that the investor takes. I'm not going to go through the detail, but just in summary, basically, how does a VC fund work, right? If you're raising money from a fund, so okay, you basically got a couple of options. You've got angel path, and then you've got like a VC path. Angel path is easier because it's more informal. You can stumble across some rich uncle or some a rich executive, and they can go and fund you, and you don't need to go through this formal process. But they usually have a little bit less money than a VC. So if you need like, let's say you want to hire several engineers and designers, and you're doing it in a rich country, then you'll need like several $100,000 probably just to kind of like fund that for a year or two. So for that, you may need to get several angels. So it's kind of like a bigger job, or you could get like one small scale VC, early stage VC to kind of fund you. So those are the options. And it's good to learn about how VC, the business model of VC, how it works. Now, we don't have time to go through it, but I just put this there and you can kind of like research yourself. A good resource is a website called, a service called Carta, C-A-R-T-A. And that has a lot of education for kind of fund managers, but in the process, that kind of helps you understand the VC model. They're actually the fund manager, so the administration manager for our fund. Do lots of networking, go out and meet people. Now, if you're, a lot of engineers and coders, perhaps this is less comfortable for them. They like to interact with, people maybe online. And that's certainly a big part of it. But also there's the physical aspect of going out and meeting people in person and building a relationship. And, Vision Pro aside, maybe in the future it might be all fully virtual, but we still live in a physical world, and it's important to kind of try to meet people in different ways. That said, I've done a lot of investments remotely. I've never met the founders. Maybe I never will meet the founders. They're just people on the other end of a Zoom call. But I think it's easiest if you have someone local. The reason why is because if you're putting in your hard-earned money, if you're not experienced in this, if you're an angel, you'd far prefer to invest in someone that is living close by. You can go and catch up for coffee with them. You can, you know that they're close by. There's some sort of comfort factor. So I think still in 2023, this is still a very powerful thing. So, use both online as well as kind of, local physical networking. That would be my suggestion. Pitching tips, look, you can read this later, but, prepare and practice, practice so that it becomes a polished thing. If you're like me and you suffer from nerves, go and practice it until, the nerves, you're more in autopilot mode. And even if you have nerves, you can still get through it and make it decent. And then try to personalize it, try to give them demos, think about how it would fit into their life, because the more that they feel invested in this, it's not just some theoretical exercise. Okay, what's the market potential? What's the market dynamics and the barriers and the competition? If it's something like, hey, you've got a pet, right? Do you ever feel stressed? You like to go and, get a massage from your partner. What about your pet? You love them and you care for them. Shouldn't they deserve a massage as well? Tell me a bit more about that. How much do you think you would pay for this sort of, try to get them involved in the conversation. So they're not just an audience, they're a participant in this kind of thing. And you will have a better get. Thanks. Yes. For example, one of the early investors I got for my mobile games company was because, investor had a daughter, and I managed to get the early beta software, via that investor to the daughter, and the daughter tried it. And we kind of had a discussion around that. What did she like? What did she not like about it? And that ended up with him, committing some early money. And that was really important. And that early money helps to get more money. The first investor is always the hardest to get on board. So once you get that, it kind of steamrolls a little bit, and then you get FOMO kicking in, and it just becomes a lot easier as you get more people. Handling rejection, you're going to get a lot of rejection. It's a good skill to develop. Take it positively, always on a positive note. Thank you so much. That's been really helpful. Appreciate it. Can I keep you in the loop? By the way, is there someone you feel I should talk to? Perhaps it's not a good match for you, but is there someone else that who this might work? And if you don't mind me asking, because it really helps me as a founder, can I get a bit of feedback? What was the thing that kind of, helped you decide that this wasn't a good match for you? Yeah. This is a skill, a life skill. And if you learn it, you will get a lot, not just investors, customers, partners, anyone really, to be honest. It's a good life skill to kind of invest in. There's some tactical stuff. We're running short on time, so I won't really go through all of that. But trying to do things as safe notes and having rolling closes so that you don't say, I'm raising $1 million. And if you've only got 100K, it looks really crappy. I've only got 10% raised. Break that 1 million down and say, I'm raising 200K. So you're already 50% of the way there. And then once you get that 200K, then you can kind of open up, the next 300K and then the final 500K, phasing things, because it's all about psychology. People want to feel the scarcity, it's I'm going to miss out on this great opportunity as an investor, So there's ways you can kind of do that in honest ways, so no real time to talk about valuation tips. But I would just say that at an early stage where you folks would start, it's less about numbers and it's more about negotiation and a sell. What can you pitch? And I wouldn't get too caught up on it. If it's a little bit less than you would like, it's okay. because it's much more important to get the funding. And once you've got the funding, you can then go and drive the valuation much higher later on as you make progress with your company. The main thing is valuation, especially if it's a safe note. It's very safe, as in, it's founder friendly. There's not much to negotiate apart from, the valuation cap. So try to push people towards founder friendly investment templates like, YC or 500 startups, etc. You can go down the crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding route. That's also viable depending on, what you're doing. If you're doing a very consumer oriented thing, or it's something targeting a very kind of, fanatic base, then yes, you can go for crowdfunding and that can work as well. And last thought, invest in your wellness as well. Being a founder can be really amazing, can be fun, can be liberating, but it's also a huge amount of stress. You're running out of cash. You're going to have to, let go of a bunch of your friends, rejections, software not working, cannot find market fit. Think about your support structures in your life. People who care for you, regardless of how work goes or how your EA project goes or not, those people are your support structure. Invest in your mental health and your physical health because they can get you through some pretty rough patches. Last comment, there's a bunch more. I ran out of time before this presentation, but I started. But some really great books that I recommend. Ultra Learning is a good meta one about like how do you learn fast. The mum test, I hate the name, but let's call it the parent test, is a really good one for kind of asking good questions. Yeah, Sandhill Road, like there's some books on understanding investors and VCs. It's an old one, but Founders at Work, I quite like it as a kind of inspiration, like reading about other founders. So I'm going to leave the contact up here and then I'm going to jump down to the questions. So now's the time to kind of ask any questions that you want. And Nicole, I don't know if we have a few minutes to just keep going if anyone's interested in that. I certainly got time to.
Yeah, I thank you so much for your generosity of time, Simon. This was a really engaging presentation and I'm super grateful. So just a time check for anybody who hasn't noticed and does have to run. We have passed the hour, so I'm going to stick around and help facilitate questions. But first, if we could please do the traditional EA software engineers unmute and clap for the presenter. So please, if you're in a place where you can do it, please unmute yourself and clap for Simon. Thank you guys so much. Okay, so we have some questions in the chat, so we can do those first. And then if people want to raise their hands, again, it'll put us into a queue. So is it Jonas? Do you want to come off mute and read your questions?
All right. Yes. Thank you, Simon, for the great talk. I had two questions. One of them is how do you balance, working on an EA organization, let's say it's a nonprofit, but also you are doing startups. How do you actually balance that time?
That's a great question. I mean, time management and kind of knowing your limits and being really productive with your time is like a whole other, topic, which I'm, if anyone's interested, more than happy to talk about that separately. But maybe as some general principles, like, there's only a finite amount of time, and I'm really a big believer, like you have to make time for, your life and your wellness. So, I'm on a 370-day exercise streak at the moment. I never miss exercise, no matter what stuff is going on in my life. And, so I think carving off time for important kind of wellness stuff. Then you've got a decision to make, like what things do you want to do and make sure that you've got the right balance and overload. So it depends on what's going on in your life. Do you have commitments? Do you have other things? So I'm a parent and I've got a 4-year-old. And so, I need to and I want to spend time with family. So that kind of carves out some of the things. And so, for example, the way I solve it personally is I work with a lot of collaborators. So I get co-founders for the projects and they're the ones who run the things. And so I've got my day job, but then I'm basically like supporting my co-founders and giving input and hopefully not getting in their way, but, helping them out in a way. So that's the way I kind of like solve that problem. It's like, hey, I want this project to happen. But for example, I have a direct EA project as well, which is like I'm writing a children's book for EA, like an EA children's book to kind of teach people about long-termism versus short-termism kind of concepts, but in a very age-appropriate way for a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. So for that one, I've just said to myself, like, this is going to take longer. Like, if I had more time, I could do this in like a few months, but this is probably going to take 6-7 months to do. And I'm just kind of like, every few days I'll go and work on a page, and then I'll send it off to the artist, and just slow iteration over time, because I just recognize that I just don't have time to do that as fast as I would like. So I think it's like choosing what works for you. Some people don't like to kind of multitask. And so in that case, like, if you can find a way to just work on your project directly, and not have to do things as side projects, then that's even better, which comes back to funding. Like, if you need money to get this off the ground or pay your bills while you're getting it off the ground, then how can you get the money? Either from donors or impact. Actually, if you're doing a for-profit company, but you have an EA angle, I'd highly recommend to start with like people like myself who, maybe do some angel investing, but they're impact oriented themselves, because they may be more kind of willing to take a chance and support you on that. So yeah, sorry, I'm a little bit rambling answer, but hopefully it gives you some ideas.
That was so fantastic, actually. Thank you. The other question I had was, if you're in a space like AI and the incumbents are moving, quite fast. And something that happened in the past, I was working on some products, and after 1 week, you see Google releasing the same product, you see Notion releasing the same product, and I think the products use the same models in most of the times. So the capabilities are the same, the quality is more or less the same, but I guess people will choose, these companies in most cases.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't read, like, there's some good writing on this topic. And by the way, I'm not an expert at all, so I'll defer to the experts. But there is some good writing on this topic about, like, where is the value going to be in for startups in AI if kind of the models are owned by the large players. But also the flip side, which is like, have you read there's a piece that floated around, which is like written by someone at Google. It's just an internal thing, which is like, OpenAI has no moat, and neither do we, and like talking about, like, in a world where, in a few years, if this is all, available open source and can run on, local hardware, then, what's the benefit? Thank you, Nicole. So there's people who've kind of written about this. I would say it's like worth to kind of, think about it before you go down the path. Like, you may build something, but then what if a person who has a lot more distribution than you, like an existing player, can go and roll it out to, millions of people, and, this tiny startup who doesn't have an audience. So it's a little bit tricky. So you may have to kind of get creative and say, like, if this is general purpose, models can do a lot of things, then what really is the value add that you can bring, and why you, like, what about you and your life makes you ideally suited to understand this kind of pain point. So, for example, we're wrestling with this problem at the moment because we run a human accountability, the Goals One is a human accountability app, and it's kind of like got a good, clear message. It's like, okay, if you're struggling and you need accountability, we're going to be your professional accountability partner, someone who's not flaky. We're going to be there for you and support you. What happens in a world if AI can, like, do a pretty decent job of that? Does that mean there's no niche for us? And we've kind of gone backwards and forwards on this. And we've kind of like come into the conclusion that actually there's going to be an explosion of like AI and bots and services. Like, everything will be, if you're interacting with, customer service agents, whatever, a lot of that is going to be, not human. And there may be some like problem with people struggling for authenticity and human connection when they're struggling. It's like, technology sometimes doesn't make us more productive. We procrastinate more with technology because there's so much like distractions and fun. So probably procrastination gets worse in an era where AI entertainment is just so compelling, then it probably makes human accountability more. So maybe we should double down on that and just not, worry too much about AI. Or maybe we should go and branch out a separate service, use our common, front end, and then just, integrate the back end and have two different services, keep them separate. One is an AI one, cheaper. One is a human one, and more expensive. So I'd say, like, it's worth to think about it. And, because, like something that seems like low-hanging fruit, maybe a big player might just make it a feature, and then it's like, difficult. So is there something different you could do?
Fantastic. And something that you mentioned about the last part that you mentioned about accountability using AI. It's something that I've been exploring, and perhaps I would like to email you about it more in terms
Sure.
of how what I've been exploring in that department.
Yeah,
A lot of
absolutely. Happy to help. There's already a few services which have kind of launched, but like fast forward a few years, you can imagine like your phone is going to have some ultra realistic like avatar built into the OS. It's going to be there all the time, listening to you, talking to you. Like that's where we're headed in a few years, I guess. So like, what can you do differently than that? Because that's going to be just part of, Google, Android or iOS in the future. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Cool. All right. Any other questions?
I have one. So I'm curious if there's something like anything in particular that has surprised you over the course of your journey as an entrepreneur.
Surprised me. I would say like just how I push myself out of the boundaries. Like as in, it's funny, sometimes all it takes is one decision, and that decision can take you in amazing kind of like places. And the hardest part is just making that decision, and these are kind of, you look back at them and they're really kind of like fateful decisions. Like I decided to go and register that domain name and get started on that. Or, it's not just startups, but like, in a startup context. And sometimes like if you, give yourself the freedom to make these decisions, then the rest can follow. Like, we did a deal with Condé Nast, which is like, if you're not familiar, is like one of the big kind of media publishing houses, and it does Vogue magazine and whatever else. And we did a partnership with Teen Vogue, not like the least fashionable person you can imagine. And I'm in New York, in their head office, where all these kind of like, where fashion is made. I know nothing about it, and I'm done a deal with these people. Like, it just happened because I kind of made a decision to go and start this thing, and then it kind of one thing led to another. And once you're in momentum, like you end up pushing yourself. So if you're on the fence and you're thinking like, oh, should I do this or should I just, not do it? I'd say like do it. Give yourself a chance and take a bit of a risk, and you'll be able to bounce back. And interestingly enough, like there's really interesting data showing that if you're working, for example, and you do a startup and the startup fails, and you come back to industry and you get a job in industry, you actually accelerate 4 years your career progress. Like on average, and this is US data, so it may not apply everywhere, but on average, you end up getting a position that would have taken you 4 years more of work to get there. So if you do a startup and fail and come back in a year, you've effectively accelerated 3 years by getting your next job. So there's very little downside risk if you've got enough kind of a safety net for yourself personally to give it a shot. And I encourage everyone to give it a shot if that's what they feel they want to do.
Definitely. Yeah. Echo that.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Genuine offer. If I can help out, just email me. On the weekends, I'm more than happy. I like to kind of get on calls, and if I can help with people, or if you've got an investor pitch you want me to, review and help give feedback on, or anything, just shout out or get in touch. Thanks, Nicole. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for coming. See you next time.
Right. Okay. Have a good night. See you.
Thanks. Bye.